IMF backs CBN on cryptocurrency suspension, says 34% debt to GDP ratio. Nigeria needs not to worry. Federal Executive Council approves projects worth 103.67 billion naira for works. FCT, Water Resources Ministry. Plus, oil rises 1%. This is Business Express on the network service of the NTA, and we are reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Benny Adams, your guide. Good to have you join us at this particular time. I will start with the story that the Federal Executive Council has approved more than 60 billion naira for the construction, rehabilitation and completion of critical roads and infrastructure in the Federal Capital Territory and other parts of the country for enhanced socio-economic development. Works and Housing Minister Babatunde Fashola and his FCT counterpart Mohamed Musa Bello announced this while briefing journalists after the council's meeting. Out of the 30 billion naira approved for roads in the FCT, 3.4 billion naira is to open up sections and research districts of Abuja, while 1.8 billion naira is for construction at Kagini.
Kagini is a community just by the Kubwa Expressway, and that access road is to link the station with the Kubwa Expressway, so that commuters coming into the city from that northern flank can use the facilities of the station to use the Abuja light rail into the city. The third memo, which is for infrastructure, is an augmentation of the existing contract for the Southern Parkway, which is the road under construction currently that commences from the Christian Center right through the NTA and busting out at the Ring Road in Kaura district.
The third one was for the design and development of an automation process for the issuance of certificates of occupancy in respect of federal government lands. And the final one was for the construction of 4 by 20 meter span bridge at kilometer 18 along Langtang Wase Road in Plateau State for 2.867 billion.
Moving on, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, says at 34% debt to GDP ratio, Nigeria is still within safe margins. The IMF resident representative for Nigeria, Ari Aisen, said this during a virtual press briefing on the recently published 2020 Article 4 IMF staff report for Nigeria. The fund re-emphasized the need for unified exchange rates in Nigeria and maintains it is necessary for Nigeria to stop fuel subsidies and high electricity tariffs to reflect cost. The IMF says with 6 to 8% revenue to GDP, policies to boost revenue are important. The IMF fund has expressed its support for the recent directive of the Central Bank of Nigeria to financial institutions to ban transactions with cryptocurrency, saying the use of cryptocurrencies for illegal transactions such as money laundering and drugs was a global concern. The federal government has set the terms for conversion of its stock of Central Bank of Nigeria (CBN) overdraft into long-term notes in a bid to create transparency around its dependence on that source of funding. The Director General of the Debt Management Office (DMO), Patience Oniha, disclosed this in an email that the 10 trillion naira debt will be exchanged for 30-year notes issued to the central bank. She said the agreement on timing for the conversion needs to be finalized to get the required approval from the cabinet, the earliest in the second quarter. Nigeria became dependent on central bank borrowing after oil prices collapsed in 2015. Oniya added that the converted debt will be amortized over 30 years, starting with a 2-year moratorium when the government will not pay anything. Well, moving on, 2 days ago, the National Bureau of Statistics released the latest inflation figures, which show that January 2020 inflation moved from 15.75% in December 2020 to 16.47% in January 2021. The composite food index rose by 20.57% in January 2021 compared to 19.56 in December 2020. What is happening? Will food inflation fall anytime soon? We welcome Professor of Capital Markets Uche Owalike, who joins us via Zoom to try to give us answers. Thanks for joining us, Prof. A very good morning to you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Okay, good to have you. Well, Prof, straight up, at this time in 2015, inflation was 8.5%, and now we have 16.47%, almost double that rate. What went wrong, Prof?
Yes, it's really a worrisome issue. Worrisome in the sense that we have an economy that is not only battling the issue of rising prices, but also battling the issue of output contraction. In other climes, what you find happening is output is contracting, and inflation rate is also going down. In the US, for example, the issue is even how to drive up inflation to meet the target of the Federal Reserve, which is 2%. In South Africa, too, inflation is a little on the low side at about 5%. But in Nigeria, it's the reverse. We have economic recession, and at the same time, inflation is on the to your question has been driven majorly by factors such as the increase in the pump price of fuel, the increase in electricity tariffs. And in 2020, for example, you recall that the value-added tax was increased from 5 to 7.5%. And there are also other issues to do with infrastructure, structural bottlenecks like transport. So it's more of a cost push thing, than a demand pull thing, because the economy is in a recession. So you would.
Okay, Prof, looking at core inflation, the highest increases were recorded in the cost of air transport and medical services. One would have thought the cost would drop now with no more lockdowns and the hope of vaccines, plus incentives in the transport sector. Prof, it's like we've lost connection. It's like we've lost connection with Prof. So we'll take a break now. By the time we establish contact, we will come back to Prof. Well, moving on our Surviving COVID-19 series today, we bring you a story of a young job seeker who turned an employer of labor amid the ravaging pandemic. She is Rebecca Agwai.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Meet Rebecca Agwai, a graduate of International Relations, Political Economy, Globalization, and Development at master's level. He had no job.
I have the skills. I've done well at university, exceedingly well at university, and there's nothing. So I sat down and I remembered what it was that I loved as a child.
Then she decided to go to yet another school.
Luckily enough, I wrote a book called How a Congress of Baboons Made a General. And from the sale of that book, I was able to get enough money to go to fashion school.
Just as she got out of school, COVID-19 came in. But with mentoring and determination to thrive beyond the pandemic,
the idea of not just having a fashion brand, but also an institution or an institute was born.
with a lot of people in the fashion business, Rebecca decided on value addition by spicing her trade with beauty artistry, photography, illustration, and event management, which she achieved through partnership.
There are too many of us and too few job openings, so we have to start empowering ourselves.
While looking to expand someday, Rebecca shares her secret for staying afloat in the pandemic.
You've got a budget, you have to try as much as possible to work within that budget. And then what we also do is that it's not everything within business, it's all about networking and forming synergies and partnerships. So sometimes the services that you're rendering to somebody or the service that someone is rendering to you is not necessarily cash based, it could be favor based. We've had a lot of referrals from starting off with friends and family members, and it has actually started to expand and grow beyond just that small core of people that we started with.
What you're wearing,
yes,
is it part of your product?
Yes, it is. This is part of our products. These are part of the designs. This is what I designed this, and we made it right here in Abuja.
And as she succeeds, she believes in holding hands and flying together. This is demonstrated in her passion for youth empowerment, expressing free of charge training for youth and women.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Now we have re-established contact with Professor Uche Owaleke, a professor of capital market. This time around is through a telephone. Prof, if you are with me, let's continue the discussion. Sorry for that interruption.
Yeah, thank you, Benny. You see, the point I was making is that several factors have actually accounted for the inflationary pressure we've been experiencing. You recall that particularly last year, there was the issue of flooding. We also had the issue of insecurity, which is still lingering. Of course, you know the effect of that insecurity, that farmers said as clashes, banditry, insurgency, and all of that. That prevents farmers from going to farms. And then the issue of the VAT that was also increased in 2020, the border closure, fuel price increase, electricity tariff increase, and all of that. So all that contributed to the inflationary pressure we are having. Of course, not forgetting the issue of the value of the naira that has been plummeting. So when you combine all this, you can see why we're having this inflationary pressure. And the worrisome part is that it has been coming more from the food. Food inflation today is over 20%. MBS says it is 20.5%. Headline inflation is 16.4%. Food is over 0.5. So that is where the pressure is coming from. The core inflation rate, which is minus agricultural produce, is just 11.8%. So that tells you that if you can address the issue of food, especially the food supplies, the inflation rate will largely come down. You also notice the trend that the urban areas are feeling the pinch the more. The National Bureau of Statistics is saying that urban inflation rate is higher than is increasing higher than rural inflation rate. And if you also look at the disaggregation of the figures by states, you tend to understand why Kogi State, for example, is said to have the highest rate of increase in terms of food, food inflation, the food component, and that's also against the backdrop of the fact that neighboring towns, neighboring FCT, for example, is having about the lowest. Kogi State has, according to MBS, over 26% increase in food. But FCT, Abuja, is having just about 18%. So that may also have to do with the issue of insecurity in that part of the country. So if you take all this together, you begin to see why inflationary pressure is high. So if we have to address inflationary pressure in the country, it is to pick these issues, these factors one after the other, as we strive to, stimulate the economy, as we strive to reflate the economy and get the economy out of recession. It's also important that we also tackle the issue of inflation at the same time.
But Prof, having highlighted all of these issues, I'm afraid domestic investors will be estimating the impact of rising prices on real investment yields. Do you think so?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A typical investor will, of course, consider the impact of inflation. Yes, if you're looking at your return has to be positive before you are incentivized to invest. Positive real rate of return means that the return you're getting is above inflation rate. Okay, and that's why you find that a lot of investments these days are going to the stock market, because the stock market is where last year, for example, that brought 50% return, 50% of course higher than inflation rate. So, but in many other areas, it's difficult to have a return on investment that is above inflation rate. So once the return is below inflation rate, it is negative rate of return. So, and that is why it should be of concern to the authorities, not only to the monetary authorities, the Central Bank of Nigeria, but especially to the government, because it is what has been established is the fact that the government has a lot of role to play to bring down inflation. It's no more beyond the ambit, if you like, of the Central Bank of Nigeria, because the Central Bank of Nigeria can no longer rely on the traditional monetary policy tools, increasing the MPR, for example, to bring down inflation rates. And that's because of these factors that I've mentioned that are exogenous to the central bank. Central bank, has little or no control over them. The issue of insecurity, for example, is something the government has to squarely, tackle. The issue of high transport costs, for example. In recent times, the government reduced the levy on imported cars. The government too has also reopened the borders. Okay, we expect that this will help moderate inflation rate going forward. But of course, a lot needs to be done, especially in the area of ramping up food production. Except we do that, the food component of inflation will continue to, become the issue. And how do we ramp up this? The government has a very good program on agriculture. If you look at the economic sustainability plan, the agricultural component.
Okay, Prof. Do you see this program on the agricultural on agriculture having an impact on food inflation falling anytime soon?
Yes, I do. It depends on the extent to which it's implemented. Of course, implementation is always the key. If you look at the 2021 budget, the substantial sums, have been allocated to agriculture, especially in the capital component. But aside from that, there are other interventions that the government, has been making, including that of the central bank in the area of agriculture. So what I'm saying is, it's important that they're well targeted. It's important possibly to scale them up. Like the Anchor Borrower program, for example, has been quite successful. But it's now to see how the Anchor Borrower program of the central bank can be expanded to accommodate as many products as possible. Because this food inflation is not just coming from rice. It's also coming from you have things like tubers, you have vegetables, you have fruits, and so on and so forth, including like the thing has to be holistically, taken up. And that's why I said there has to be a conscious, deliberate effort to increase food production. If it's possible, let's have...
Okay, Prof. Looking at it, with all you've pointed out now at this point, what's the hope for a single-digit number for Nigeria's inflation?
boils down to the point I'm making. The hope for the 2021 budget is projecting that by December 2021, the inflation rate will stand at 11.95%. So it's still, the projection we have for 2021 is still not single digit. So maybe we'll be looking to 2020. And there are threats, also the risk I also see down the line. For example, if pump price of fuel is increased again on account of the rising crude oil price, that will exacerbate, the problem. Again, if the central bank heeds to the IMF recommendation, which you mentioned earlier, to unify exchange rates, devalue the naira further, that will also exacerbate the problem. So we may not see the end of this, in sight soon, except we take it from the other side.
And get to do the right thing by taking the right steps at the right time. Thank you so very much, Professor Uche Owaleke, Professor of Capital Market. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you. Asian stocks fell on Thursday as investors locked in profits on sectors that have outperformed recently in the sign of growing caution about the recent rally in global equities. Details of market activities and early trade in this report.
Stocks in Asia Pacific were lower on Thursday as mainland Chinese markets returned to trade after a long Lunar New Year break. The Shanghai Composite rose 0.42% to 3,670.56. Hong Kong Hang Seng Index slipped more than 1% as of its final hour of trading. The Nikkei in Japan closed 0.19% lower at 30,236.09. European stocks are expected to open higher on Thursday as investors await earnings from big names in the region, including Airbus, Barclays, and Daimler. London's FTSE is seen opening 15 points higher at 6,715. German's DAX up 22 points at 13,931. France CAC 40 up 11 points at 5,776. That's the global stock market. Musa Abubakar, Business Express.
And on that note, we end this episode of the program. Don't forget you can access this and all previous episodes on YouTube. You can also communicate with us on Twitter. The handle is NTA News Now. The hashtag is BizX. We value your feedback. Do join us again on Friday at 3 p.m. for another package. I am Benny Adams saying, stay safe.